What is going on with the price of N64 games? They've been coming down all year, and they've been coming down faster than the prices of games on other systems. Now, I don't want to complain, I enjoy buying cheap games, but I am curious. So I went on a quest to find out why this is happening. And you know what? I figured it out, and today I'm going to talk to you all about it. So by using the website called price charting, one can see the average prices that games are selling for. It's become an important part of retro collecting, for better or for worse. It is often used for pricing within brick and mortar stores that sell old games. For collectors, it's a good resource to have nearby before making a game purchase, so you can tell whether or not you're getting a good deal. The site also prices other collectibles like magic cards and comics. This all may sound like a plug, but I'm not associated with price charting. I just end up using it a lot as a collector, and I enjoy looking at data in general, at least more than the average person. Here's a big picture of what's going on with video game prices. They went up tremendously during the pandemic. I covered this in a previous video. It seems that people wanted something to do since the amount of time spent inside the home increased. They also may have wanted some stress relief from the negative news of the pandemic. Games for Nintendo-based systems seem to have the biggest rise in pricing. They kept rising throughout the pandemic, but in 2022, some of the growth flattened across many systems, and in some cases it declined. The largest percentage decline was the N64, which has fallen 26% so far over the course of 2022. No other system comes close to that decline rate. I'll get back to the N64 in a minute. On that previous video, I proposed some theories as to why game prices were slowing down across multiple systems during 2022. The inflection point seemed to correspond to the beginning of the war in Ukraine. It also corresponded with the coming of spring after the worst days of the pandemic had seemingly ended. I also proposed that the prices may have just peaked because they couldn't just keep going up forever. People in the comments pointed to the overall economic conditions, including inflation. That is very likely, although for game prices, the inflation had already been happening, and if they're starting to come down, that's actually deflation in terms of game prices. But people probably decreased the amount of used games they were buying because they were paying higher prices for gas and groceries. Whatever the reasons are, the N64 is having the steepest decline, and I wanted to know why. What you see here is Price Charting's landing page for the N64. It shows the average price over time, represented by a blue line, and the median price is the yellow line. I'm going to ignore the median for this video just for the sake of simplicity. When you hover on the average line, you can see the price at different points in time. What it says right here above the graph is important. These are averages of individual loose games, not including the unlicensed games and rare variants. These average prices come from two sources. One is an algorithm that combs the sold listings on eBay, and the second one comes from data from Price Charting's own version of eBay, which they call the marketplace. It's where people buy and sell games. I've never used it, so I can't really tell how much traffic it gets and what percentage of the average data comes from that source. So the $17 I see for July 2019 was the average price of a loose N64 game sold on eBay and the Price Charting marketplace in July, not including unlicensed and rare variations. As I move to the right, you can see the increases that happened at the time of the pandemic, going from about $25 average to about $35. Then in March 2022, it had a big fall, and it continues to decline, though the declines are more modest now. Compare that to the Super Nintendo, whose prices kept going up during 2022, but they've leveled off recently, going down just a tiny bit. The Genesis has leveled off in recent months as well, same with the PS1. I just want to break away from that for a second. I realize this isn't the most exciting YouTube video out there. There's a lot of data, and it's only going to get worse because I'm about to bring Excel into it. But I had to go through this process in order to solve the mystery about the prices. So just bear with me while I do my nerdy little thing. I also want to take a moment to thank my Patreon supporters. Some of the higher tiers get to put these messages at the bottom of the screen, so that's why you're seeing those. And I guess we are ready to move on now. I actually took every major system and made a column for the January 2022 price, and I made a column for the September 2022 price. At the time of this video, it is September 2022. 29 systems had an increase, varying from a 2% increase to a 45% one. These increases may sound like a lot, but if I had done the same thing for 2021, I think the increases would have been a lot higher. 11 systems had no change in 2022, and 4 had a decrease. The N64 had the greatest decrease by far at minus 26%. The next closest was Virtual Boy at minus 9%. The first thing I asked myself was, are there a certain handful of games that are responsible for pulling down the entire average? Or is it that all the N64 games are coming down equally? Luckily, the site also charts the averages for each individual game. Below the chart, it tells you the current average for loose, complete, and new. It also tells you how many times the game sells. So for Robotron 64, there are 3 loose copies sold a week. If I want, I can add the history for complete in box and new. Much like I did for the various game systems, I made a spreadsheet that compares the prices for January 2022 to September 2022 for N64 games. There are around 370 N64 games listed on price charting, which includes the variations, like the not for resale ones. I'm not going to pull the data from all 370. My nerd powers only go so far, but what I do want to do is pull the data for the ones that are expensive. It might be that the rather expensive games dropped in price for whatever reason, and that brought down the overall average. I also pulled data from many of the well-known N64 titles, like GoldenEye and Mario 64. Those games may be less expensive, but I imagine they sell more often, so that might have an effect on the averages as well. I avoided the dirt cheap ones like NFL Quarterback Club, which only goes for $2.99 loose, because at that price I don't think it would affect the overall average that much, no matter how often they sold. I avoided the variants because those aren't included in price charting's overall average for the N64. Through painstaking manual work, I ended up selecting 74 games. I also collected the sales frequency, 1 sale per month, 1 sale per week, and so on. In another column, I converted that to units sold per week, which is a more reasonable metric to work with. I created a price difference column too, which shows the dollar amount of the change that occurred between January and September. Now I'm starting to get a picture of what's going on. By sorting that price difference column from low to high, I can clearly see what games fell and what games rose. The red ones are the ones that fell. Stunt Racer went down the most, losing $39, but it only sells 2 units a week. To really hone in on which games are affecting the overall average the most, I need to consider the change in price and the frequency. So I created, you guessed it, another column. Price difference per week. I calculated that by multiplying the units sold per week by the difference in price. F0X fell $3 and it sells 7 units a week, which means the price difference per week is negative 21. With that new column in place, I then sorted by it, and voila. The monetary loss from these titles at the top of the grid is tremendous. Paper Mario went down $18 from January to September, and it sells twice a day, so that adds up to a decrease of $252 a week. Here's what the chart for Paper Mario shows. You can clearly see a peak, then a decline. Look at the other ones there. Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, Majora's Mask, Go Man, Conker's, Kirby 64. Some of the most common and well-known games are there, and their losses, I can say with a certainty, are pulling down the overall prices of N64 games. One last calculation I did was the overall price difference for the entire list of games that I pulled, and it came to over negative $1,000 per week, which further drives home the point. I think there's 2 reasons for why those particular games decreased in price. The first is that some of those got re-released on the Switch Online service, which Nintendo calls the expansion pack. Paper Mario, Majora's Mask, and Kirby 64 were among the ones that got re-released. Of the 36 games that went down in price, only 10 got re-released, so it can't be the only reason. The other reason, I believe, is that people went out and bought N64 games during the pandemic, and while they were in the store, they snatched up some of the more plentiful titles like Paper Mario, Majora's Mask, ones that the store had in stock. They played through them and it rekindled their childhood memories, but after a year or so, those people had finished those games, or they began to realize that the games don't hold up as well as they did when they were a kid, so they resold the systems and games, which flooded the market for certain titles. They could have been further incentivized by the fact that Nintendo is going to keep re-releasing N64 titles, so there's less reason to hold on to the physical media. The same kind of declines did not happen for other game systems. It could be that there's something unique about the N64 crowd. Maybe their nostalgic itch is intense at first, but dissipates quickly once it's been scratched. If you're one of the people who sold back some N64 games in 2022, let me know what your story is. I'm sure there's a lot of you who want these prices to keep coming down. I know I do. And I think there's probably some of you who actually want the game prices to crash. That may not happen though. Even though N64 game prices have been coming down, they haven't reached pre-pandemic levels, and they probably never will. On that depressing note, I want to suggest that you pivot to another video up there in the corner. That's the one where I bought a new chair for the game room. May your games make you happy and smart, and may people respect you for playing them. So long, everybody.